A very good day. Can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Hello?
Perfectly. I can hear you perfectly.
Can you hear me perfectly?
Yes.
I thought my headphones had problems.
Can you hear me yourself?
Oh yes. Oh, okay. That's fine. That's all right.
Okay.
Welcome to the show. I'm just waiting for everybody else to log in. Then we can see how it goes. Can you hear my music as well?
Yeah.
Okay, that's lovely. Welcome, 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 welcome.
Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Let's hope it's work out. A very good afternoon, leaders. A very good afternoon to everybody who is listening, who is tuned in. This is Matarenda Wekwa Shumba on Radio 54 African Panorama, as we create the Africa that we want. As you should know, this past week was hyped by Zimbabwe's anti-sanction movements. Everybody just, waking up, and we're talking about sanctions, which always bring a debate, by the way. People are always asking questions like, okay, where we are right now is really not because of sanctions on Zimbabwe, but a whole lot of stuff that is involved. So we decided, why not bring in people who understand this, so that we can talk about this and see how it goes. I'm trying to share something with you guys so that we can understand what sanctions are and how they affect the people of Zimbabwe. Most people feel that this is just a game. If you just tuned in, this is Matarenda Wekwa Shumba, Mata Shumba, in creating the Africa that we want. Is the Africa that we want possible when we are still under economic sanctions, parts of Africa, the rest of Africa? What needs to be done for us to actually, get this done? Let me just see if I can share something here, something that I'm trying to extract so that I can share the downloads, if it's possible. I'm not sure. I'm not too sure if you guys can hear this. Can you hear it?
No, we can't. I can't.
Okay, let me try again. Let me try again. Stop sharing. It's not picking what I want it to pick, so that everybody else will be able to be in the same tune. Okay, this is not possible. Okay, we're waiting for others to just join us in so that we can start the conversation. Okay, I think I was wrong. Okay, got it?
My name is Rutendo Matingarare. I'm the chairman of the Zimbabwe Anti-Sanctions Movement, or ZASM, and we created this organization from the diaspora as people that are tired of living in the diaspora. But we realize that Zimbabweans continue to be displaced into the diaspora because of economic sanctions that are destroying jobs, destroying our ability to export, and denying us access to the free markets. And so we decided to do something about it. The emphasis of our organization is to fight sanctions legally, and to also fight sanctions by giving the Zimbabwean people information and knowledge about what sanctions are about so that they can begin to stand up against the sanctions. And when we talk about informing Zimbabweans, we're talking about government officials, politicians, students, civil society, business, and galvanizing the whole of Zimbabwe to unite against fighting these economic sanctions. Right, the first set of sanctions that are there are the obvious sanctions that everybody talks about. Those are called the ZIDERA sanctions. And the ZIDERA sanctions were imposed by the United States government to ensure that our government does not have capacity to get loans from multilateral lending institutions, and to also deny our government the ability to cancel what we call colonial loans. Now, you have to understand that governments ask for loans to build their countries, and Zimbabwe needed loans, according to the Lancaster House Agreement, to first of all rebuild and reconstruct the country after the destruction of the war for liberation, and also they needed to rebuild the country because of the economic sanctions that had been imposed by the United Nations from 1966 up until 1980. But more importantly, the government of Zimbabwe needed money to rebuild the country after 90 years of colonialism because of the fact that we never got reparations to build our country. Now, when they decided to ask for these loans, they were promised a grant of 4 billion in between 1980 and 1983. That grant never came. And because that grant never came, the Zimbabwean government was then forced to go and take loans to rebuild the country, to build schools, roads, and build this education system that all Zimbabweans brag about. It was also used to build this wonderful healthcare system that we had in the country that is now being affected by these economic sanctions. And also with that, at Lancaster House, they were promised the ability to cancel what are called colonial debts. So colonial debts include the $700 million US, which is about $2.8 billion today, that the government of Zimbabwe had to inherit from the Rhodesian government. It also meant that whatever we used to build schools and education systems to bring us up to speed to what we needed to give our people basic human rights, which was not done by the colonizer, also had to come from these loans. And also had to come from us asking for the cancellation of these previous debts. But with ZIDERA, we could no longer ask for these loans to build our country, reconstruct our country, and more critically, we could not ask for the debt to be cancelled. So this debt continues to multiply because of the interest and the compound interest that continues to come. Then we've got the executive order sanctions. The executive order sanctions were imposed after ZIDERA, 2 years after ZIDERA, because ZIDERA's purpose was supposed to remove ZANU-PF from parliament by forcing the Zimbabwean people to vote for anyone else other than ZANU-PF. And so when 2002 came, ZANU-PF president was voted into power, and with that, the American government decided to impose another set of sanctions that were going to target the industry and target land reform, target the farming, and target production in Zimbabwe. The intention was that if they target the economy of Zimbabwe and collectively punish Zimbabweans, deny them access to loans, deny business access to loans, deny business export markets, deny business payments, then that would make Zimbabweans suffer so much so that when we came to the next elections in 2008, then Zimbabweans would vote ZANU-PF out of power and they would vote the opposition into power.
A very good afternoon, a very good morning. Mahora say, mamuka say, manirwa kanaka sanuponan linjani, hui mora, wherever you are. I'm not sure where you are. I'm not sure where you are watching from, but this is Matarenda Shumba, Martha Shumba, once again on Radio 54. Today we are talking about the issue of sanctions on Zimbabwe. Are sanctions the elephant in the room, or it is just, an excuse, like other people might call it? I have Robson Ruhanya, who have already, made his comment. Respect the rule of law and constitutionalism. Stop corruption. Zimbabwe does not need loans. They must stop stealing the national cake. So this is from Mr. Robson Ruhanya. That's his comment there. Respect the rule of law and constitutionalism. Stop corruption. Zimbabwe does not need loans. They must stop stealing the national cake. So this is where we are. There's just been a lot of debates regarding the issue of sanctions, and people have been asking a lot of questions. Where to from here? Where to from now? What do we do? Today I'm joined in by Kwame Gonza, Pan-African revolutionary from Connect Africa organization, who loves Africa so much. We also have Mr. Patson Malisa, who will be joining us later on, who is the deputy of ECOSOC, AU ECOSOC. We also have Mr. Rutendo Benson Matinyarare, who's going to be joining us. And I think you saw his video, which I used as intro for people to understand what are sanctions and what sanctions are on Zimbabwe. I think we also be joined by Mr. Advocate Simba Chitando, and we already have ZANU-PF's Mandaza. Mr. Mandaza is here with us. I think network has been kicking him in and out, but as soon as I get him, I think he's going to be the first person to speak, because his network is not on. For those who wants to ask questions, I will open the floor for question and answer session, so that you can ask questions directly to the people who are presenting, and so that we can have this conversation. Let us respect each other. No insults to individuals. I know when it comes to this issue of sanctions, especially where Zim is concerned, it goes political and people start throwing things at each other. We think, the innovators for coming up with online stuff. Imagine if it was in person and people get angry like that. I would be presenting with a machete just to make sure that, when things start happening, I can, use it. But anyway, today is the day. We had 25 October, which was set aside to stand for Zimbabwe SADC in solidarity with Zimbabwe to tackle the issue of sanctions. And this year's theme is enhancing Zimbabwe's resilience through economic development and intensifying engagement across the continent and the diaspora. This is getting everybody out there to say, let us come together and find solutions to this elephant in the room, or not elephant in the room, whatever the case might be. This is us coming together to fight the case of sanctions. This campaign, the whole campaign that is happening right now, which led to the 25th of October being the day where we stand with Zimbabwe, started in 2019. I think some of you saw me with the same jacket doing an interview on SABC talking about the sanctions imposed on Zimbabwe. That's the day that I created a lot of enemies. But that's the story for another day. But it was that's when the whole campaign started, and the campaign started from civil society, and it just spread to the rest of the continent, to people. And we wrote communiques, we wrote petitions, and so forth. And so far, the biggest sanctions that have been removed, that were removed in 2020, were the Infrastructure Development Bank and the Agriculture Development Bank. They were removed in 2020. So that was a huge win, I can say success. I'm mentioning only those two. We had individual. This is, I'm doing it deliberately actually, because people will be asking like, okay, no, I'm not on the list. Okay, those two banks were on the list and they were removed. So we'll hear more about how that affects the country, and every opinion, anything at all, is welcome on this platform as long as we make sure that we respect each other. I'm gonna move on to the deputy of ECOSOC, who was also part of the people who drafted the first communique that went to the to the AU, not the UN. Let's see what he has to say.
Ladies and gentlemen, I bring you greetings on behalf of the Economic, Social, and Cultural Council of the African Union, and extend my thanks for the invitation that has been given to us to participate in this critical event in which we commemorate and popularize the SADC Day of Solidarity with the people of Zimbabwe. The Economic, Social, and Cultural Council of the African Union serves as a bridge of collaboration between the government and civil society of member states in the implementation of African Union projects and programs. This is prescribed in depth through our development plan, which is Agenda 2063. The Republic of Zimbabwe, through its Ministry of Foreign Affairs, has been a key ally in the establishment and success of the National Charter of ECOSOC in Zimbabwe. Furthermore, the Republic of Zimbabwe has been an active participant in the signing and ratification of principal charters of the African Union, particularly the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance, along with the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. This has been cemented by the official joining of the Africa Peer Review Mechanism by the Republic. It is thus on this basis that we at ECOSOC found it prudent in January 2019 to release a communique calling for the escalation and mobilization of the region towards the removal of sanctions imposed on the Republic and people of Zimbabwe. The basic infrastructure and goodwill of people in advancing good governance and human rights is only possible in an environment where the people are empowered to shape their own destiny. To intentionally endeavor to cripple the basic livelihood of a people in the name of advancing human rights and democracy only serves as an impediment towards the progress intended. It is therefore essential that any well-meaning member of the international community place strong introspection to the fact that peoples develop and evolve as living conditions and standards improve and are raised above the threshold of decency. With this, we are fully behind the theme of overcoming sanctions through resilience and international solidarity. We reaffirm our position as stated in the African Union Assembly Decision 219 of the 12th session held in 2009, where heads of state called for the removal of all sanctions placed against Zimbabwe in order to ease the economic and humanitarian situation. We further reaffirm our willingness to continue in mobilizing the Southern African region and the African continent as a whole in ensuring that the matter of sanctions against Zimbabwe is always in the agenda of all progressive members of the global village. We are cognizant of the great value Zimbabwe has added to the African development spectrum over the last 20 years through its participation in the African Union. This has been manifested in spite of the impediments inflicted by the restrictions to fully participate in the global economy and village. It is therefore once again our pleasure to participate in this program, bringing the voice of women and youth to the forefront, as they are the most vulnerable victim of the current affliction and will ultimately be the main beneficiary of its alleviation. With this, I wish to thank you and look forward to the participation of all the speakers in the program today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was Mr. Patson Malisa. He is with
Ladies and gentlemen,
us today, joining in the fight for sanctions against Zimbabwe. That's the ECOSOC, Robson Ruhanya. He's here again. Let's remove looting and high levels of human butchery. SADC have no control over America and EU's foreign policies. I'm sharing this so that we can have a conversation. We want to have a conversation today. We want to have a conversation. We all need to speak about this to make sure that we get somewhere. Welcome Kwame Gonza. I'm gonna start with you. You are here. Others have been kicked out. I think it is a network. A very good afternoon to you. What's your take? Are sanctions the elephant in the room for Zimbabwe, or we are making excuses? I can't hear you. No. I still can't hear you. No. But I see that you can hear me.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
I got you now. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I was still muted. Yeah, it is interesting. I want, first of all, to thank you for organizing this program and all the people that are watching and felt it important to participate in this program. And I want to thank also the ECOSOC officer who sent us a message from the African Union, and generally everyone who's watching once again. Yeah, I think it's important to look at, I was discussing today the relationship within power, the relationship with power within, for example, the African continent, and then power on the international stage. It is important for us to understand that relationship when we are talking about the sanctions. The sanctions, definitely, we know that they are, they are harmful. They have harmed economies and countries. Countries like Cuba. Zimbabwe is not the first country to be sanctioned. Countries like Cuba, countries like Iran, countries like Venezuela. But we have to go back and understand why were these sanctions imposed. I think it would be immature for us to just loop in and say sanctions are these, stop the corruption, that. We have to understand why these sanctions were imposed on the country. Are they justified, first of all? Are these sanctions justified for the last 20 years? These sanctions have been on Zimbabwe, and majority of the people have been watching, even those who thought that they were justified, have started speaking up against them. Like at the just recently ended 77th United Nations General Assembly, almost all African heads of state spoke against these sanctions which have been imposed on Zimbabwe for a very long time. But because for a very long time we have understood as Africans that these guys who are imposing the sanctions are bullies, and they are colonialists, and they are racists, first of all, you see that Africa had found a way within the region, at least within the SADC region, of protecting Zimbabwe, or taking on or carrying this burden together with Zimbabwe. For example, South Africa, with all its imperfections, as we know, the different phobias that have been going on, but to a certain extent, South Africa has been able to stand with Zimbabwe, through this difficult time. And not only South Africa, but we see that countries like also Botswana and all the others in the region. And this has helped Zimbabwe to shoulder this burden, to shoulder this, challenge, and continue to move on and struggle against it. So if I say that these sanctions were justified, I think I would be not only unfair to the African people, uh, but also to the Zimbabwe people, because the sanctions, the genesis of the sanctions has to be understood in the context of in international relations. So if all the other countries where sanctions have been imposed were examined, countries like Venezuela, and then we come and examine the sanctions that have been imposed on Zimbabwe, then we see a pattern. We see a pattern that a certain group of people who are greedy, some people who are racists, a group of people who are colonialists, they want to steal other people's resources. And so they use this excuse of sanctions, excuses of human rights, excuses of corruption. But when you examine these things that are being accused, the things they are accusing Zimbabwe of, or the things they are accusing Africans of, you find that the same things these guys are doing, and even they're doing it much more worse. When we are talking about corruption, corruption is already there in the United States, in Europe. When we are talking about buying of votes, we are talking about buying of vote. People who are voted into office. They call
That's
it.
right.
They call it lobbying, but it is corruption. This is corruption. They just sanitize it and call it lobbying. The insider trading is corruption that is going on in the United States, Congress, which is so-called parliament. So you find that the things which they are accusing Africa of doing, which I'm not saying that it should continue. I'm not saying that the corruption should continue in our system. But on the other hand, the people who are accusing the Africans of carrying out these human rights violations and corruption, they are doing even much worse. When you look at 1 million people were killed in Iraq, and then they are accusing Africans of being violent during elections, you see that it is much worse on the other side of the line. So standing and basing on that understanding, I think it gives me a better judgment, and it puts me in a good position to understand that these sanctions, first of all, they are very unjustified, they are unfair, and the people who are imposing them, they have no right in themselves unless they have decided, or they have claimed, and they have apportioned to themselves the right to be gods on earth, and which we don't accept. We don't accept that these guys who are imposing sanctions, they have any right to impose the sanctions, or they are superior people compared to other human beings. These are just normal human beings. So they have no right to impose sanctions on any other human beings, because they were not sent here by anybody to regulate human behavior. They were never sent here by anybody. They can't justify their authority over the rest of humanity. So this is how I could briefly, from my introduction, look at these sanctions. But we need to fight them as Africans, and together we need to stand together and then continue to fight them, as I'll come back to continue to elaborate on it.
All right. Thank you so much. That's Kwame Gonza from Connect Africa, articulating on the need for unity to fight sanctions on Zimbabwe. As we have picked already on the comment section, it seems and feels like there are some people who believe that we deserve what is going on. We deserve what is happening. I see Rutendo Matinyara is trying to log in. Is not connected. I'll be communicating as well as adding people so that we can have this conversation. And we have Tadiwa also, who is the pressure group. you will be asking relevant questions from all of you guys based on what you guys are saying and are talking about regarding the issue of sanctions. If you are watching, wherever you are watching from, and wants to ask you questions, just let me know. I can see you on the comment section so that we can add you in to have this conversation. But in the meantime, I would like us to have the conversation go on. Sorry, I'm trying to log somebody in who is failing to connect. So we are here today since after the 25th of October, which was Saturday Day for standing in solidarity with Zimbabwe. I have a lot of comments coming through here. I'm going to be sharing them as we move from Alfred. Midzi, sanctions needs to go, but SADC knows what will make these sanctions to be removed. Why not start there, urging Zim to respect human rights and stop arbitrarily arresting people just because they are in opposition, like Job Scala. All right, that will be a question for our panelists. Let's see if we can get all of them here. I have another comment from Robson Muhanya. It's senseless and barefaced corruption, not sanctions. Where is the 15 billion for Marange? Where is the 60 million COVID money? We need to have constitutionalism and the rule of law. Africa heads of states in SADC, a band of corrupt fellas. Sanctions are targeted on criminals. Sanctions are fair. Yeah. People are sharing whatever they think. Personally, I once used this comment that sanctions are like poison, which was poured on a communal well, aiming to kill the rich people, but they all drink bottled water. So who suffers? No matter what's going on. Yeah, this is somebody who hates rich people with all their guts, their actions, and everything. And what he does is just come and put poison in the communal war, and they all, notice what has happened, and they go for what? Bottled water. And guess who's going to suffer the effects of those sanctions? It's not the people that we all think they should be suffering from that. I'm going to share again regarding the list of sanctions that we have so that we can have this conversation while other people are joining in. Network, guys, that's the issue. It's a bit of a problem for other people to join in using StreamYard, but I'm going to play this one more time.
My name is Rutendo Matinyarare. I'm the chairman of the Zimbabwe Anti-Sanctions Movement, or ZASM, and we created this organization from the diaspora as people that are tired of living in the diaspora. But we realize that Zimbabweans continue to be displaced into the diaspora because of economic sanctions that are destroying jobs, destroying our ability to export, and denying us access to the free markets. And so we decided to do something about it. The emphasis of our organization is to fight sanctions legally, and to also fight sanctions by giving the Zimbabwean people information and knowledge about what sanctions are about so that they can begin to stand up against the sanctions. And when we talk about informing Zimbabweans, we're talking about government officials, politicians, students, civil society, business, and galvanizing the whole of Zimbabwe to unite against fighting these economic sanctions. Right, the first set of sanctions that are there are the obvious sanctions that everybody talks about. Those are called the Zidera sanctions. And the Zidera sanctions were imposed by the United States government to ensure that our government does not have capacity to get loans from multilateral lending institutions, and to also deny our government the ability to cancel what we call colonial loans. Now, you have to understand that governments ask for loans to build their countries, and Zimbabwe needed loans according to the Lancaster House Agreement to first of all rebuild and reconstruct the country after the destruction of the War for Liberation, and also They needed to rebuild the country because of the economic sanctions that had been imposed by the United Nations from 1966 up until 1980. But more importantly, the government of Zimbabwe needed money to rebuild the country after 90 years of colonialism because of the fact that we never got reparations to build our country. Now, when they decided to ask for these loans, they were promised a grant of 4 billion in between 1980 and 1983. That grant never came. And because that grant never came, the Zimbabwean government was then forced to go and take loans to rebuild the country, to build schools, roads, and build this education system that all Zimbabweans brag about. It was also used to build this wonderful healthcare system that we had in the country that is now being affected by these economic sanctions. And also with that, at Lancaster House, they were promised the ability to cancel what are called colonial debts. So colonial debts include the 700 million US dollars, which is about $2.8 billion today, that the government of Zimbabwe had to inherit from the Rhodesian government. It also meant that whatever we used to build schools and education systems to bring us up to speed to what we needed to give our people basic human rights, which was not done by the colonizer, also had to come from these loans. And also had to come from us asking for the cancellation of these previous debts. But with Zidera, we could no longer ask for these loans to build our country, reconstruct our country, and more critically, we could not ask for the debt to be cancelled. So this debt continues to multiply because of the interest and the compound interest that continues to come. Then we've got the executive order sanctions. The executive order sanctions were imposed after Zidera, 2 years after Zidera, because Zidera's purpose was supposed to remove ZANU-PF from parliament by forcing the Zimbabwean people to vote for anyone else other than ZANU-PF. And so when 2002 came, ZANU-PF president was voted into power, and with that, the American government decided to impose another set of sanctions that were going to target the industry and target land reform, target the farming, and target production in Zimbabwe. The intention was that if they target the economy of Zimbabwe and collectively punish Zimbabweans, deny them access to loans, deny business access to loans, deny business export markets, deny business payments, then that would make Zimbabweans suffer so much so that when we came to the next elections in 2008, then Zimbabweans would vote ZANU-PF out of power and they would vote the opposition into power.
A very good afternoon once again. Mahorase, Mamukase, Matarenda Wekwashumba again on Radio 54 African Panorama. And we are joined in by the man himself who have just shared the introduction and the bio where he was articulating the sanctions that are on Zimbabwe, because many people, the reason why I reshared this introduction is because many people don't know what sanctions are on Zimbabwe, so that we can just avoid people keep on asking the same questions over and over again. And everybody, you are allowed to ask your questions. Before I can move to Rutendo, I would like to ask Tadiwa, do you have any questions thus far or anything that you would like to ask based on the bios shared or the presentations done so far?
All right. Greeting, Martha, and to the panelists and the viewers. As for now, I don't have any questions. I think I'll just like to listen in and ask questions from there, I guess. Thank you.
All right. That's fine. We'll just have you here until we introduce the Q&A. There is, Rutendo, I've been sharing the intro that you shared with me, what ZASAM is all about. And I do have a comment here from Robson. It's senseless and barefaced corruption, not sanctions. Where is the 15 billion from Marange? Where is the 16 million COVID money? We need to have constitutionalism and the rule of law. Africa heads of states in SADC are a band of corrupt fellas. Sanctions are targeted on criminals. Sanctions are fair. That's his comment regarding the issue of sanctions. And I have Wellington who's saying, please, We need you guys to show people beyond reasonable doubt how the sanctions affect ordinary people. And having you here, I do believe that the panelists that we have today, you know enough about sanctions to be able to answer such questions. Over to you, Ben.
Thank you so much. I was still writing the comments that were given by. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, I can.
Okay,
Was
so
just sharing.
I was still reading the message from Robson, and the message from Robson is disturbing. He makes the conclusion that corruption is the problem in Zimbabwe. But what is problematic about that kind of a conclusion is that when you sit and understand that there have been some studies that were done over 12 months by the United Nations, the South African government has been doing a study over the past 3 years because they also didn't believe that sanctions were on Zimbabwe and that sanctions on Zimbabwe were affecting Zimbabwe. Only for them, the South Africans, to discover through their own study that included a lot of professionals and research professionals that the sanctions on Zimbabwe were the ones that were actually affecting the Zimbabwean economy. The United Nations had a study for 12 months that also came back and said that sanctions are the biggest impact on the Zimbabwean economy. It also said that those sanctions are illegal. They're depriving civilians their access to human rights, healthcare, education, food, water. They even say that the sanctions have caused the deaths of Zimbabwean people. They show the correlation between the destruction of the Zimbabwean economy, a reduction in our trade surplus from 3% all the way down to minus 17%. They show that we had an inflation that was 20% before sanctions, and that inflation rocketed up to 1.2 million percent in just 8 years of sanctions. They went on to also show that healthcare and the availability of medicines in our hospital decreased from a positive surplus of medicines in our hospitals when sanctions began to a point where right now most of our hospitals do not have up to 60 to 70% of critical medicines in those hospitals. So the studies that have been done by the United Nations Human Rights Council, the study being done by the South African government, and there's also a report that was released last week by a group called Impact that was actually financed by USAID. And they also came up with the conclusions that Zimbabwe is facing a very high rate of what we call financial crimes. And those financial crimes are being caused by a country that has been under sanctions for the past 57 years. This is not my words. These are the words of Impact that says that the Zimbabwean economy has become accustomed to operating outside the normal financial parameters because it has been under sanctions since the UN sanctions of Rhodesia through to the apartheid sanctions in the 1980s, all the way now to the sanctions that we've got on a country. So they suggest that a country that has been under sanctions for the period that Zimbabwe is being under, they say it's 27 years. My calculations say it's been 42 years. But anyway, irrespective, we seem to be having consensus on the fact that Zimbabwean sanctions have caused financial crimes to affect the country. He then asks, what happened to the 15 billion? It's very problematic that in this day and age, there's still somebody who believes that Zimbabwe produced $15 billion worth of diamonds. Because when we understand Zimbabwe has got an 18% gem diamond rate compared to industrial diamonds. That puts the average price of Zimbabwean diamonds on the world market at about 58 US dollars a carat. We also understand that the yields that were being yielded from Marange and other mines in Zimbabwe, where you had to move a ton of soil to be able to produce 2 carats of diamonds. So when we look at that, and we look at the fact that there's a suggestion that Zimbabwe was able to acquire $15 billion worth of diamonds that were sold on the black market. We also have a Kimberley Process figure that says that Kimberley Process sold $6 billion worth of Zimbabwean diamonds. This puts the diamonds sales at $21 billion. That would mean Zimbabwe was the biggest diamond producer in the world during the period that they say that these diamonds were stolen. It will also mean that Zimbabwe produced 400 million carats of diamonds at the average price that I've given you. For it to have produced the number of diamonds that will give us this 21 billion. And so that would mean that we need to see the mountains of soil, mountains of gravel that was displaced to produce 2 carats per every ton of soil that was moved. So you need 200 million tons of soil, mountains of soil in Zimbabwe to actually justify the production of 400 million carats of diamonds. We haven't seen those mountains. You need earth movers that should have moved this soil. And if you calculate the number of earth movers and the number of tipper trucks that you would have needed, you would have needed at least 5,000 truckloads of soil to be able to produce that. You would have need those trucks consuming fuel. You would have need the workers who were controlling the earth movers. You would have need security companies to be protecting those diamonds within that period. We never saw all that. So there's no correlation between employment, the number of trucks, amount of soil moved, the number of input to produce the number of diamonds that is said to have been produced. And Mugabe himself said that when he gave that number was not actually a serious number. He was being dramatic. So we also understand that during the period that they're talking about, the time that this 15 billion was supposed to have been produced, the world price of rough diamonds went up by 30%. Now, if Zimbabwe was responsible for putting a 15% increase of diamonds into the marketplace, this should have caused a flooding of the marketplace, an oversupply that should have reduced the price of diamonds instead of increasing the price of diamonds. So from a technical perspective, the loss of $15 billion of diamonds doesn't make sense. Finally, Pact itself, the one that did this survey and study that I'm talking about of illicit flows of money in Zimbabwe, says that between 2002 and 2013, Zimbabwe lost $9 billion in illicit flows from the mining industries. Now, if you understand that, they're talking about $9 billion lost in gold, chrome, and any other resource, including diamonds. So if you understand 9 billion is a lesser number than 15 billion, and the period that has been taken to compare this illicit flow actually starts from a period before diamonds were discovered in Zimbabwe, which goes to show that the $15 billion figure on just diamonds is actually a false figure and a false number when you consider that much of the resources that are pilfered from Zimbabwe is actually gold. Finally, he talked about the 60 million lost through the health. Yes. I think we all know that the minister was being tried together with Delish Ngwaya, and they were acquitted by the courts of Zimbabwe. Now, if we say that we respect the Constitution enjoins us to respect the institutions of our country, and the institution of our country that is preeminent is actually the Constitutional Court. And so if the courts have said that these people have not been proved to have stolen this COVID money, they've been acquitted, it is problematic for us to continue to assume that these people stole money which cannot be proved by the courts, which is the reason why I then refused the last statement that the gentleman made when he said that the sanctions are on the right people, because those people who are under sanctions, which is all Zimbabweans, that's what Zidera is, sanctions on the government of Zimbabwe to deprive the Zimbabwean people the right to get loans, the right to cancel colonial loans. The Zimbabwean people surely have never been tried, and therefore they cannot be convicted and punished by sanctions. So that is wrong to say that the sanctions are on the right people. And even when we talk about the so-called targeted people, those targeted people were never tried for any crimes, for any violations by any court. They were never found guilty, and there was never a law that pre-existed that determines that the punishment of people who are found guilty of any crime should be punished by sanctions that deprive them of their right to move, their right to travel, their bank accounts, and actually steal their money from their bank accounts and block their wealth. There is nothing like that in international law. So the sanctions are not right, they are not on the proper people, and they have been instituted as punishment without trial, which is actually a violation of human rights and persecution of civilians through collective punishment, which is a crime against humanity. Thank you.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. That was Rutendo Benson Matinyarare, the chairperson of ZASAM, and the men we've been fighting sanctions head on from day one. So, to those who are asking questions, I hope you are answered. Keep the questions coming. We wanna hear more, and keep it clean. Okay. Wow. Rutendo, one thing that I'm gonna ask you, if you have got anything, if you've got any documents in PDF or links or any other videos that you have prepared, especially on the 115 billion to the packed user aid report that was done and any other reports. I think there are people who are requesting that we can always share later on. This is not for now, but for later on, so that people can read. One thing that I can safely tell you is that it takes a lot. And I can't say special people, certain people who can sit down and do all those calculations and research. Most people would now just, take the summarized versions. And we've learned a lot, throughout the campaign when videos were shared. It actually, shows what is going on without going on the internet and going through everything that the US have written. I think over the years, we have only read one side of the story, which is from the people who imposed the sanctions on Zim. And now we are hearing the other side. And we've got the other side, which is our own Zim. I cannot say opposition only, but there are other people who feel that sanctions should stay on. They also have another version of what needs to be done. And before we move in, I want to move to Mr. Mandaza. He's here. His network is kicking him on and off. So since we already have him here, I want him to proceed before we can just move to question and answer sessions. Good afternoon, Mr. Mandaza. We have seen quite a lot of movement where ZANU-PF is concerned in South Africa. I will focus on South Africa. And on the 25th, the party mobilized people to go to the US Embassy. And a question came up. Why in South Africa, since you guys in ZANU-PF believe that these are sanctions, why not just go back home and be ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe and and fight sanctions in Zimbabwe? I don't know what you say about that, but that's a question that's been asked. What's your take on that?
Thank you for the opportunity. And I would like also to thank Rutendo for being incisive when it comes to the issue of sanctions. And we hope that he continues to give people the knowledge and understanding that they want or they should have in order for them to know that sanctions are the real elephant that is in the room, not these other things that people talk about. Yes, they could be there, but the big and real elephant in the room, they are the sanctions. Coming to your question, or the question that is being raised by people to say, why do we have to demonstrate in South Africa? I must say to you that demonstrations are not only restricted to South Africa. By demonstrations by ZANU-PF, they are no longer restricted only to South Africa. On the 25th of October this month, I was at the United States Embassy in London with other fellow comrades demonstrating at the United States Embassy and calling the United States Embassy to listen to the call or the voice of reason coming from many quarters, be it African presidents and other members of the progressive forces who are saying the sanctions that were imposed on Zimbabwe in the year 2000 and the other years that were to follow, they are illegal. They have denied the right of Zimbabweans to enjoy their human rights. They've caused a lot of untold suffering to the majority of the Zimbabweans, and has impacted negatively on the economies of countries that are neighboring Zimbabwe. So it is no longer a ZANU-PF issue, nor a Zimbabwean issue. It is now a regional and a continental issue, because the effects of these sanctions are being felt not by the people that the West and their allies purport to have targeted, because we see the general public suffering and leaving Zimbabwe because of the impact of the sanctions. And it is for that reason that we feel that embassies anywhere in the world where America has representatives in the form of ambassadors, they should be made to understand that Zimbabweans are, say in this case in South Africa, not out of their own volition, but they have done so because of the negative impact of the sanctions, which have then acted as a push factor. Because when people are leaving Zimbabwe, they are doing so because of the economic situation that is in Zimbabwe, which we have been arguing, and the people have now started to understand that our argument has always been true, that where we are in terms of our economy is as a result of sanctions. Yes, there are other issues that people might cite, but the big elephant in the room are the sanctions. When we were at the United States Embassy in London, the call was similar to the one that is being made by the people in South Africa. The people, Zimbabweans in London, in the United Kingdom, were also saying, we are here not by choice, but we are here because of the economic sanctions that have hit hard on the economy of Zimbabwe, and that has affected the majority of the people who have had to seek, or the young ones have had to seek employment outside Zimbabwe. And sadly, one other effect of the sanctions is that the majority of the people that have left Zimbabwe is the active group, those that are supposed to be in employment, those that are supposed to be participating in the turnaround of the economy of Zimbabwe. They are out there improving the economies of other countries. And we are saying, surely this cannot continue to be there. And hence, we need to demonstrate, we need to make these calls louder and louder, until the voice of reason gets into the Americans and their allies. Any other argument that they come up with is neither here nor there. They must understand that the sanctions are illegal, they are not targeted, they are a violation of the human rights of Zimbabweans, and they are a threat to majority of the people in other countries, the leadership in other countries, to say that if you go the same route that Zimbabwe took to take their land, will also do the very same thing that we have done to Zimbabwe. So they are also threatening not only Zimbabwe, but they are threatening neighboring countries so that they do not take what rightfully belongs to them. Because land in Africa belongs to the Africans, and the countries, different countries in the region and on the continent should embark on the land reform program to make sure that land gets to their rightful owners, so that we can also be masters of our own destiny, not to be dictated by those that came and colonized us. So this is our position. They are illegal, they are not targeted, they are a violation of the human rights, they are a ploy to remove this ZANU-PF government, and we will resist that in the manner that we resisted the continued existence of the whites in Zimbabwe.
Wow, thank you. That was Mr. Mandaza from ZANU PF, who is saying we are here to stay as ZANU PF. Sanctions are illegal, and we are going to fight tooth to nail to make sure that sanctions are removed. And he mentioned something quite interesting, and I believe Thabo Mbeki once wrote something about that, that sanctions that were imposed on Zim were actually to scare off countries that wanted to take over their land. So the issue of land is always be brought up when we're talking about sanctions on Zimbabwe. Many people don't believe that it was because we took back our land. That's why we were, punished with sanctions. We always have these arguments. But as we move on, I would like to ask a question here, not to Ms. Mandaza, but to Kwame. Kwame Gonza from Connect Africa. He's been lobbying and pushing more for the unity of Africa in fighting whatever challenge Africans are facing. So to Kwame, do you think Africans are united enough to fight sanctions on Zimbabwe or any other challenges that we are facing in Africa? Do you think we are united enough? I mean, listening to the presentations here and the questions being asked by other Zimbabweans and other actions that we have seen in the past, do you think we are really going towards what Connect Africa stands for?
Thank you very much, Martha. And thank you, my brother Rutendo, and thank you very much, the representative from ZANU-PF. On the question of whether we are united, I think that we have been, as a people, as Africans, I think we have been united enough, like I elaborated from the start, that regardless of the challenges which South Africa has faced with immigration or the movement, I will not call it immigration, but with the movement of other Africans, not only Zimbabwe, only that these sanctions have exacerbated the situation in Zimbabwe, and Africans have moved from Zimbabwe into South Africa much more than the rate when they would have moved there if the sanctions were not there. So South Africa, its actions and its accommodation and acceptance to show that this burden, this responsibility together, I think that is a sign. That is a sign in itself of unity. And then the other neighboring countries of SADC, like I mentioned, the acceptance of other African countries to present this at the United Nations and argue that the sanctions have to be dropped down. That is in itself an expression of African unity and actually an expression of Pan-Africanism. So if you ask me that Africans united in this, I think that the Africans are very much united on this issue of sanctions, and they have been united for a very long time. Only at this stage, I think that as Africans, we have to take this to the next stage, because if you look at Africa's grievances have not been listened to for, since the 1960s. If you look at, for example, the reformation of the United Nations, we have called the United Nations itself, as my brother Rutenda has mentioned, has recognized that these sanctions are illegal, they violated the United Nations Charter. Okay, but the United Nations has failed to be reformed because it is still in control of the same people who are imposing these sanctions. Okay, we have called for the reformation of the United Nations since the 1960s, but these people have refused to reform the United Nations because the United Nations itself has in some way become a tool for these same people who are imposing sanctions on other African countries. So my argument or my call to the African heads of state, and it is very good that the representative of ZANU-PF is here, because I consider ZANU-PF the only, one of the very few remaining organizations on this continent which are Pan-African in nature. But that means the spirit of Pan-Africanism, which is unity, because you cannot talk about Pan-Africanism without talking about unity and African unity. ZANU-PF itself, I think it has to position itself and intensify its engagement, because what is its engagement on the African continent, as the subject has said, as the theme of the, has said, when we are talking about sanctions, the re-engagement, Zimbabwe's resilience through economic development, engagement and re-engagement. Okay, I would add the re-engagement on the continent, on the African continent and its diaspora. So I think that ZANU-PF has to put itself in a position whereby it has to re-engage the continent intensely. Okay, he spoke about the progressive governments on the African continent. Pan-Africanism has always delivered whenever we have called on it. Whenever we have called on Pan-Africanism, I tell you it has delivered. From slavery to colonialism, whenever we work together, it has delivered. President Uhuru Kenyatta and Ruto, when they faced problems with the ICC, they called on Pan-Africanism. They came to Ethiopia, to the AU, and they lobbied other African heads of state. And we came together and we were able to defeat the ICC. Okay, so when President Cyril Ramaphosa and Botswana faced difficulties because they were banning Africans into Europe after we have discovered the second variant of COVID, President Cyril Ramaphosa moved to the west part of Africa to lobby other African heads of state to stand together. This was an expression of Pan-Africanism. So that spirit, you see, that spirit has to be taken on. And organizations like ZANU-PF, they have access to at least ample resources. Okay, and I believe that as an organization which is remaining as a representation of this spirit of Pan-Africanism, has to take the next stage, because the international space has not responded. Like I said, in the 1960s, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah started after the death of Patrice Lumumba. Nkrumah called for the reform of the United Nations, starting in the 1960s. So reforming the United Nations did not start today. The call for reforming the United Nations did not start today. It started in the 1960s, immediately after the death of Patrice Lumumba. So they did not act. So that means that now the task is left with us to act. And like I say, that and those Pan-African organizations which still represent the spirit of Pan-Africanism and unity, very few on the continent, and the ZANU-PF is one of those organizations. Now there's two things which I would recommend, that the act of engagement and re-engagement on the African continent has to be intensified. It has to be intensified. First of all, he spoke about the progressive governments. The progressive governments on the continent, they are there. We have governments like, for example, I would mention in Mali, we have Ethiopia, we have, in the West, all over the continent. I want to see ZANU-PF and Zimbabwe engage, with countries in Ethiopia. I want to see ZANU-PF intensify its engagement with Mali. I want to see ZANU-PF re-engage and intensify its engagement with Algeria, with Burkina Faso, with Guinea. I want to see that kind of engagement, on the continent. Okay, that I think has to be done so that the solution, we can find it here, because the solution is here. Those guys are not going to respect us if we don't work together. They will keep hopping all over the continent and going up and down and destroying our continent while we are sitting back. So, number two, I think that ZANU-PF has also to re-engage with the other Pan-African organizations, or what I would call the grassroots Pan-African organizations which are on the ground. Because to a certain extent, Pan-Africanists have been alienated. Neoliberalism has sort of alienated the Pan-Africanists, from the fruits of power, okay, from the seat of power, that Pan-Africans are on the peripheries now. They have the solution. We are sitting on the periphery. We have the solution. But we cannot be allowed, because we are living in a dispensation of neocolonialism. So if we have a big brother like ZANU-PF, the only person who is there to represent the spirit which we represent down here, then we are waiting for you. At least you have access to the small resources. Touch these people and empower them so that the people in Mali, the Pan-Africans in Mali, should be able to speak about the problem, in Zimbabwe, the sanctions in Zimbabwe. The Pan-Africans in Ghana, the Pan-Africans in Ivory Coast, the Pan-Africans in Uganda, they should be able to speak about this problem of sanctions and understand and articulate it, to their friends or to the local people, the local African people, to understand that these things are not only sanctions to harm Zimbabwe, but this is colonialism. This is the naked colonialism. And this would help to bring the understanding that we have to resist the colonialism that is going on, because it is coming in different guises, like what is happening in Mali. France is disturbing all over there. These are all forms of colonialism. So it would help us as Africans, I think, that to work together and then to enhance that unity as Africans and continue to work together until we attain the kingdom which our forefathers envisioned. Because Pan-Africanism, I've been hearing many saying that, oh, Pan-Africanism is dead, Pan-Africanism is no more working. But it is working. Pan-Africanism is still living very strongly. It is still living through the through the African Union. However much the African Union faces its challenges, all its challenges and inefficiencies, but that is the spirit of Pan-Africanism, which was formed by the spirit of Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism gave us independence. So it has, Pan-Africanism itself, through all the challenges, has kept on moving, and surviving and transformed itself, from a revolutionary force into the Organization of African Unity. So from the Organization of African Unity, Pan-Africanism continued to transform itself into the African Union. Okay, so it has continued to live on to give us hope that this continent, one day it will be free, it will be unified, and the Africans will be free. So I think that we need to continue to tap into that spirit and work together as Africans. So I want to thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. That's Kwame Gonza from Connect Africa. He is a Pan-African and believes that we need to unite as Africans to fight every challenge that we are facing. And I think ZANU-PF representative, Mr. Mandaza, you heard what his call and what his ask is all about. I'm not sure if other Zimbabweans will agree with you. Yes. If you heard what he is asking for your party to engage and re-engage with Pan-Africans across the continent and other governments, we have been. I think what made this whole campaign a success, if I might call it that, or where it is today, is that Pan-Africans, from individuals to organizations, civil society, started fighting this fight and engaging before the year, I can say before the year 2018 to 2019. It's been politicians going out there and talking about sanctions, which didn't make any sense. You end up asking, like, okay, your name is on the list, that's why you're talking about this. So we never had the understanding of how this impacts us as individuals, as businesses, as a country, as ordinary Zimbabweans, until civil society came together and joined in the fight, which was lovely. I think ZASAM was formed from different people who came from different organizations, different individuals to come together. We had seen the likes of coalition as well. It was church groups, it was community leaders, it was individuals, it was media coming together and starting telling the story of Zimbabwe. And we have reached so many people out there, some who did not believe. I had one guy that we used to fight about sanctions. I can't mention his name because, yeah, for obvious reasons. We used to fight about the issue of sanctions, and it always goes back to ZANU-PF sanctions, politics and sanctions, until he wanted to buy something from the USA, and he was told that because of sanctions, he cannot purchase from the US. It has to go through South Africa, which meant he was gonna pay tax in South Africa, and from there, when you wanna take it to Zim, a lot of things that were involved, which meant that he was not gonna make any profit. And he said, "Tell me, how far are you guys with your fight, and how do I deal with this?" I'm like, "I don't know how you can deal with this. You can only join in the fight so that you can understand more and see what angle that you can fit in." One of the problems or challenges that was faced is that everything was politicized. When you guys from ZANU-PF, I'll say this because Mr. Mandasa is here. When you come with your scarves, it becomes all about politics. It's no longer about the broader picture of what sanctions are all about in the fight. I understand that you are the ruling party. I understand that you are the government and so forth. But whenever there is ZANU-PF, a lot of people will take a step back and say, "I know, there's ZANU-PF, and ZANU-PF is leading. So we are not going to be part of this. They are just here to justify themselves and so forth." But with the civil society coming in, it's actually getting better and better to hear from different voices about this. Now, my question is first to Rutendo, Benson Matinyarare. Yeah, we are here now. We have marched. I think we did march. We did the marching. We have marched. We have raised the flag. We have spoken about this. We have blocked embassies. We have sent the petitions. What is the next step? First, I would like you to highlight, is there any successes between 2019 and now? Any successes? And from there, what's the next step? We can keep on marching till kingdom come, but what's the next step to make sure that they can hear us, that we are serious about this? I'm sure they're now getting used to 25 October, we'll see Zimbabwean flags. If you want to see a lot of flags, we'll just wait for next year. What's the next step?
All right, thank you so much. What is so ironic is that this year, they were so prepared for the marching that they actually got people with phones and cameras to go through to the marches and to ask the marchers what it is that sanctions were. They asked the marchers to define sanctions. They asked the marchers to explain how these sanctions affect and influence them in the marching. Influence the civilians that were marching. And very few people could answer that question. And I think one of the biggest things that we've been saying as civil societies to our government is that we cannot march without creating awareness on the ground. We cannot march just for the sake of marching when the people who are going to march cannot tell their stories and how sanctions are affecting them. Because I think part and parcel of the issue of marching is to give a platform where global media and media houses come and hear people who are affected by sanctions telling their story. This year, people marched, and the stories that we ended up hearing are people starving at the marches, people not having food at the marches, people not being given water at the marches, people being told that they're going to a funeral and then ending up being brought to the march. Those are not the purposes of why we march. We march so that the woman on the street, the orphan, the widow, the person who is suffering, the vulnerable person suffering to sanctions, comes and tells their story about how they are suffering. But that can only happen if we educate the people on the street. And this is why you saw people like myself did not participate in marching this year, because we are just simply undertaking a rhetorical action that is not driven by the love and passion of educating our people on what sanctions are doing in their lives and demystifying the sanctions. And so one of the things that our civil society organization, ZASAM, has done is we have desisted from marching and rhetoric. And we've begun to say that the Human Rights Council, which we were very instrumental in pressuring the government of Zimbabwe to call this the Human Rights Council and the UN to Zimbabwe, they gave us the weapons and the tools to now begin to take legal action against the sanctions. We cannot continue to say sanctions are illegal without taking legal action to prove that they're illegal, without taking legal action to enforce our rights and to remove the illegality. So we believe that part and parcel of the solution going forward is, number one, we need to take legal action against illegal sanctions. We need to go after the sanction senders, and we need to go to against those that are implementing sanctions, and we need to go against those that have indeed called for the sanctions for political gain. We have already started legal action against banks in South Africa and the American government that pressures the South Africans through bilateral agreements. So we're already dealing with the sanction senders and the implementers of sanctions. This year, before year end, we're going to go to Zimbabwe. We're going to go against the banks that are implementing sanctions from Zimbabwe. And then we're also going to go after the opposition party that called for the sanctions to punish the Zimbabwean people through persecution, to deny them water, food, healthcare, education, and the right for their government to give them social services, to force the Zimbabwean people to vote for the opposition in line with the Zidera objectives of bringing democratic change. So we're going after those people because rhetoric is no longer good enough. From there, we want to start educating the Zimbabwean people. In Zimbabwe, sometimes we tend to give too much importance to the important people, to executives, to educated people, and we forget our masses. We want to go on the ground and start educating the masses, students, elders, the youth that we saw lined up at the marches but didn't know what sanctions are and how sanctions influence them. We even want to educate politicians, business people, and civil servants so that they begin to understand what sanctions are, how they work, to be able to understand how these sanctions affect them. The reason why this is important, especially for me, is that we've seen countries like Iraq. Iraq was a country that had some of the biggest number of PhD graduates in the world. But Iraqis did not fight sanctions. They did not create awareness globally of how US sanctions were affecting them. They continued to politicize the fight against sanctions. Eventually, those sanctions divided the nation. Hungry people got angry. People with no jobs got angry. Husbands who couldn't take care of their children got angry. People who were hungry, who didn't have water, who didn't have healthcare, began to blame their government for those problems instead of realizing that these are the consequences of sanctions. And by so doing, the country got fragmented. The people who were fragmented began to fight each other, and that opened up room for intervention from the Americans and NATO. It's the same thing that happened in Libya. The Libyans got divided in a country so rich with oil and fuel. They couldn't get certain basics. They couldn't get certain technologies. They couldn't get certain medications, despite all the money they had because of sanctions. This divided the nation. When the nation got divided, there was civil unrest, there was wars. When the government tried to defend itself and to defend its people from the rebels that were attacking, the Americans intervened and they overthrew the government. And this has happened in Syria, it has happened in Yemen, it has happened in Afghanistan. And we're warning the Zimbabwean people that we need to be smart enough not to be like those Arab countries that did nothing about sanctions. We are an English speaking nation. Let's use our English speaking capacity to talk to other Africans, to talk to regional partners, to unite us so that this war does not happen in secret. We don't get divided in secret, and we don't have propaganda lying that our government is killing its people, so the West intervene on the basis of protecting Zimbabweans, when yet they're intervening to take control of our resources and to reinstitute colonialism. Remember, what's happening with sanctions happened before. They once came saying that they're coming to civilize us. They're coming to teach us how to speak English. But yet in reality, they came to take our resources. Now they are using neo-colonial tools like sanctions to destroy nations and to make nationals start fighting each other. And when that happens, they then come into our countries, intervene, destroy our militaries, destroy our nations, and take over our resources as they did in Libya. They are now controlling the oil that Muammar Gaddafi used to control. They destroyed the gold dinar that Muammar Gaddafi wanted to bring into action. Finally, we need to deal with the cartels in our countries that are actually fighting anti-sanctions because they want sanctions to continue. We have been sabotaged as a civil society organization as we launch our case in South Africa by cartels that are in the country that don't want sanctions to go away. These are the people that are behind getting us denied the evidence that we need in the courts to prove how sanctions are affecting Zimbabwe. And so we need to unite as civil societies against individuals who believe that sanctions must remain so that they become rich while everybody else is suffering. Because at the end of the day, if the majority of the people continue to suffer under sanctions, one day they will get tired, they will uprise, and it will cause us problems. So we cannot have a few individuals protecting their monopoly, protecting their self interest at the expense of the entire nation. If we have to protect Zimbabwean companies from competition or unfair competition from the West, let's create legislation, let's create the laws, but let's not preserve sanctions that continue to destroy our infrastructure. They continue to deny our children culture and education. They destroy families, make men not able to take care of their own wives. Hence, their wives end up going to ask other men or businessmen in the country for assistance because the economy is not working. We need that to change. We need every Zimbabwean to have an opportunity to prosper. We need the youth to have an opportunity to get a job. We need the youth to get an opportunity to get a loan from the bank. That can only happen if the sanctions are gone. I saw a question here. Someone was asking me, can you give us evidence beyond reasonable doubt of how it is that sanctions affect the normal person? The youth, let me give you an example. We heard the university students complaining that they cannot afford the university fees. In my time, university students never complained about not being able to afford the fees because the government had a grant system that used to give grants to poor children, of which 80% of them were poor children who could not afford to pay for university. But because our government was collecting taxes from a very vibrant business community, a formal business community, the government had taxes to be able to pay those grants for those students. Companies, with so many formal companies, big companies that could give scholarships to students for them to go to university. So poor students had a form of a what you call it, a protection. They will be given money to go to school, money for books, and a grant to even pay their accommodation and pay for their own food. That doesn't happen anymore because the formal sector of our economy was destroyed. Individuals then began to have informal businesses that don't pay taxes. And so that's how you suffer because of those sanctions. And so you also suffer because your parents don't have jobs anymore. The formal industry doesn't provide jobs anymore. It allows for those that are entrepreneurial and hardworking to go and take land, to go and take resources, and to go and start businesses. But not everybody can do that. So a lot of parents don't have jobs. So they can no longer pay for university fees, even high school fees for their children. Those are the impacts of sanctions on you. Technology. There's certain softwares that are not allowed in Zimbabwe. Certain scholarships from outside Zimbabwe no longer give scholarships to Zimbabweans. So the Zimbabwean student is now blocked from taking opportunities from all across the world to go and educate and to go and be educated in sharing knowledge with other students because of these sanctions. They can't get certain softwares in the country. Companies cannot use Sage Pastel because Sage Pastel in South Africa is now owned by a British company that denies services to Zimbabwe and doesn't license to companies in Zimbabwe. So that way, companies cannot account, companies cannot adhere to some of the requirements of global international finance. And that sees our banks being blacklisted, being risky. And so we see over-compliance by sanctions. You also see the fact that we cannot get certain fertilizers, certain chemicals. So farming in Zimbabwe is expensive. The cost of food in Zimbabwe is generally more expensive than any other SADC nation because we buy chemicals and fertilizers at very high prices. Sometimes our government cannot buy those fertilizers directly. Sebo chemicals that used to manufacture these fertilizers, Zimfos that used to manufacture these fertilizers, they are all under the sanctions. Because of that, they are not able to get loans to grow their facilities and factories. Just the other day, we had a situation where Sebo Chemicals was denied a loan by IDC in South Africa because it's on sanctions. That money was supposed to be used to actually revamp one of the factories that manufactures chemicals for water purification. That means that Harare does not have purified water. We understand that there's been a reduction in people who've got clean water in Harare from the 39% that it used to be to 29% now because of the lack of chemicals, the lack of money by municipalities, which are managed by CCC and MDC, by the way, not the government of Zimbabwe. They can no longer replace the pipeline, the piping. They can no longer clean water. So people are now relying on boreholes. I understand, but Bulawayo cannot even give clean water to its people 24 hours a day. They only give for 8 hours and they stop. Then people have to find alternatives. Those are all impacts of sanctions that are affecting you. And how do I give you the evidence to prove this beyond reasonable doubt? We never had those problems anytime before 2001. These are problems that started in 2001 and never before. And there are some of you here who are listening to us. We were young in 2000. You didn't know what was being offered before 2000. So you believe that what you have now, the use of boreholes, the lack of electricity, the lack of money in the banks, the lack of loans is normal. It's not normal. It only came about the moment sanctions started. Because by 1997, 4 years before sanctions, Zimbabwe had the second biggest stock exchange in Africa. It had one of the most vibrant economies in Africa. Hence, we saw immigrants coming from South Africa, Botswana, Mozambique, Angola. Angolans used to be full in Zimbabwe because the education system there, the economy, and the vocational training environment, security, education, and health were world class. And all of that died between that period and 2000 because of the sanctions. The fact that our inflation was sitting at 20% when we got to 1989, 1998, and all of a sudden, when sanctions came, it came from there to 560%. From 560% in 2003, it shot up to 1.8 million percent. That has never happened to any other nation. It happened to Zimbabwe because when our economy started, it was controlled by our colonizer. So when sanctions were imposed, the colonizer merely took their money out of the country, collapsed the economy, and that immediately had an impact on you and me. The fact that you go to clinics today, you go to hospitals today, and you cannot get certain medications, you cannot get syringes, you cannot get bandages, is a sign that your government does not have the foreign currency. It does not have the suppliers who can supply it with medical equipment, with medicines, because those people refuse to do business with your government out of fear of being put under sanctions. Your government also doesn't have enough foreign currency to import what it is that these suppliers have, and those suppliers will not give your government a loan because of the fact that your government is under sanctions. And the sanctions are clear. If you look at the executive order sanctions, 13469, they stipulate that anyone who is on the target list, so these are the 144 special designated nationals, who constitute companies, banks, individuals, investors. These people, you're not allowed to do business with them according to the United States without applying for license to the United States president. However, it then goes on to stipulate clearly that you also cannot do business with the government of Zimbabwe, companies owned by the government of Zimbabwe, and those that do business with the government of Zimbabwe. So what that means is, and you cannot clear their funds, you cannot give them loans, you cannot give them technology or machinery, and you cannot give them assistance. This means that there's a prohibition on any NGOs, any banks, any companies, any manufacturers, any software companies doing business with the government of Zimbabwe, its municipalities, which are also local governments managed by the opposition, its companies, and anyone who does business with them. You will understand that those are blanket sanctions on everybody. Then there's the Zidera sanctions that say that they deny the government of Zimbabwe loans from multilateral lending institutions who promised to give Zimbabwe those loans on the basis that this is what Zimbabwe would get instead of reparations. They would give us loans, allow us to develop our education, our hospitals, our roads, and our infrastructure, which you must remember that during Smith's time, only 6% of the population lived in towns, while 94% of our people were confined to reserves. They needed permits to come into towns, and they could not get jobs because the Rhodesian government could not take care of these people. So when the government of Zimbabwe comes in, it now wants to enable those 96%, 94% of our people in the rural areas to come to town if they want to, but it had to make sure that they're going to have accommodation, they're going to have schools, they're going to have healthcare. And that is why the government of Zimbabwe built 5,709 schools between 1980 and 2000. That's a 20-year period. But yet Smith government only built 18,600 1,861 schools. Now imagine, 90 years it took Smith to build 1,861 schools, but the government of Zimbabwe, in 20 years, built 5,709 schools. It built hospitals. We had 12,000 beds in our hospital system when we took over Zimbabwe. That's what the Smith government built in 90 years, 12,000 beds. But the Zimbabwean government today has got 29,000 beds together with Smith's beds. So we've been able to put more beds into Zimbabwe in the period of 20 years, 40 years, than what it is that the Rhodesian government put into the country in in a 90-year period of time. That money that we used to develop all this infrastructure, that was money that cost us a lot of money, which the multilateral institutions at Lancaster House, through their British and American counterparts, had said, we will cancel those debts for you. What you've got to do to rebuild Zimbabwe from the colonial destruction, from the lack of human rights, basic services of the colonial government, when you've put that and your people have those and you're over indebted, we will cancel those loans for you. Never happened. So Zidera blocks us from getting those loans. And then it also blocks us from canceling the debts of what it is that we spent to build a country, to do the job that the British government and its colonial settlers could not do in 90 years. Yet they had obligation, according to the UN Charter, that said that non-self-governing peoples are entitled to healthcare, education, and all basic services from the colonizer. So they didn't do that. So it was our responsibility to do what the colonizer didn't do. It was our responsibility to get loans to do the job that the colonizer didn't do. And then the colonizer promised that we won't give you reparations. And you must think of what that means. The Jews have been getting reparations for just 5 years of German occupation. They've received $140 billion of reparations. Zimbabwe was under 90 years of colonialism, had to fight for its independence. The country it was fighting for its independence was put under UN sanctions, which destroyed industries. When we come to 1980, our industries are destroyed by the UN. And then we take over that country that's deindustrialized. Feruka is no longer working because of UN sanctions. When we ask for a loan to re-establish and to retool Feruka, they refuse. So that we must be buying fuel every single day, which is part and parcel of why today the sanctions target our fuel. They try to stop us from buying fuel. They prohibit those countries that sell fuel from selling us fuel because that fuel has to be sold in US dollars. And when we try to make US dollar payments, the banks in America that have to clear those payments simply block them. So now, as a nation, we are forced to look for other means, other methods. We have to take briefcases of cash to go and pay for this fuel. We have to go through third parties to pay for our fuel, to pay for our fertilizers, pay for our medicines. And that way, we spend a lot of money, and some of you then call it corruption, yet it is just ways to circumvent the system. Gold, we can't sell gold directly to the London Bullion Exchange that is responsible for buying and selling gold and determining its price. We have to go through third parties. Diamonds, we have to go through third parties. And some people charge a premium. Some people even steal the diamonds. I remember there were diamonds that were taken to Antwerp at some time. They were taken there. They were seen by the client. The client wanted them. The client made a payment. The payment was blocked in the United States. How is it that a country can progress that way? That's how sanctions influence you and me. That's how they affect us. And that's how they affect our government from generating taxes. That lack of generation of taxes affects the hospital you go to, affects the school you go to, affects your ability for your government to assist you when there's a drought and to provide for you what we call a cushion or social cushion from the effects of economics. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much for breaking that down. Before I can ask my final questions, we are about to wrap up, so I'll be very quick. Tadiwa, you had a question, you wanted to ask us something.
Yes, thank you very much. To Rutendo, I think you're saying a lot of good points, but unfortunately, this information is not easily available to the general public, and I think it definitely should be. If you are on Twitter, you would notice that the general youth public are starting to question, actually, are these sanctions justified? But it seems there's no credible voice out there that is there to answer them and tell them, no, they are not justified. In fact, we need to fight against them. And I think we need to get more youth on board because the youth have a way of working around social media and getting of an opinion that matters, and actually that can bring about change in our country. Um, I would also like to say I've read a lot of comments, and also in the comment section you can see I see a lot of people saying ZANU PF is evil and the country is unbearable. You can't live in the country. I think it's absolutely false. And just some ideas to address this. There are a lot of people who are actually going around Zimbabwe taking videos of the wonderful sites that people in the diaspora don't actually get to see. And I think it's important that we empower such people to get these kind of footages out there. I would start on a personal level. I started watching an account at about 1,000 followers, and now it's sitting at almost 20,000. So there is an interest from the diaspora to actually see what is going on in Zimbabwe, as opposed to just hearing from newspapers. Going forward from that, I would like to know, yes, there are sanctions, but I believe we need a way forward. Right now, the general consensus is that there are sanctions, and therefore, if this political party wins, we are going to leave. There is no future for us. I think this needs to be addressed in order to retain some of the youth back into Zimbabwe so that we can grow the economy. I myself, I'm a recent graduate, and I would like to come back to Zimbabwe, but um, it's very difficult for me to know where to start and so forth. Um, yeah, so that was my first question. And then I would also like to know, I was recently on YouTube and came across the Malk deal. I believe they are here in Zimbabwe to build a smart city, a cyber city. How come more of these deals can't be done in order to get over the hurdle of sanctions? Is this not a way for us to build our country? Because I think this is a step in the right direction. If and when this deal does come to happen, it would be very great in keeping youth and making sure that we actually now are in control of our own futures. So why can't we have more of such deals? I think there should be more, in my opinion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. That was Tadiwa, a graduate and a young person who is passionate about Zimbabwe and would like to see more youth involved in fighting sanctions or growing our economy from whatever group they are speaking from. Do you want to answer that quickly, Rutendo, so that we can move on?
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, Tadiwa, we need to talk more to the youth, but we also have to encourage our youth to have a reading culture. There are excuses being made by the African youth now that no, we've got low attention span, so stuff that is too long and articles that are too long, we're not going to read. Unfortunately, in the world that they live in, which is a knowledge economy, they will never be able to achieve anything as long as they're lazy to read and as long as they want to be given snippets and spoon feeds like their children. Our youth must understand that they are going to be the adults of tomorrow. Adults have to be informed. Adults have to read. They cannot get away with reading information on Twitter and then thinking that they're going to know how to react to the world that they're going into. It's a competitive world, a world of people full of knowledge. If they can study to get degrees, they should be able to study and read complex issues like the issue of sanctions, which I clearly articulated that the reason why Iraq suffered to sanctions is that its PhD graduates were lazy to read about sanctions, even though it had so many PhD graduates. We can't make the same mistake in Zimbabwe. And we do have small snippets, small videos, but sometimes the youth want to see twerking, they want to watch the videos of people fighting and gossiping. They need to get more deeper than that, because if they want to win a war against imperialism, they cannot play soft, they cannot play like children. They think that they're going to fight with adults who are evil and cruel, who want our resources. So I think there's no way of escaping that. And of course, the government of Zimbabwe has got to put in more resources for us to be able to go out into the world and teach the youth. Because remember, we've only gotten to this point where we got now because people like ourselves went out to start teaching those Zimbabweans who are interested enough what sanctions are. we defined the sanctions, we explained the sanctions, and then we began to lobby the government to actually go to the UN and to get the UN involved into the issue of sanctions so that they can get a ruling that could then be taken to other African leaders to say, there, ZANU-PF is not under sanctions because of violating human rights. It's actually the one whose rights are being violated by the illegal sanctions. And when that successfully happened, we had more knowledge. And even other African leaders who are usually cowards became brave enough to stand behind a Pan-African movement because the UN had said that the sanctions are illegal, and that campaign has now followed through. Our youth need to get on the same bandwagon because of information. Finally, you asked, why don't we have more cyber cities? You have to understand that we didn't have cyber cities before because of the issue of sanctions. Sanctions had decampaigned Zimbabwe. Sanctions had positioned Zimbabwe as a pariah state. Sanctions had positioned the Zimbabwean government as illegitimate. And the strategy that was employed by civil societies that began to redeem the image of the government and to re-legitimize the government has now made it okay for global countries, global investors to again engage the government of Zimbabwe. The illegality that has been spoken about by the UN has made it okay for brave investors to say, I'm going to go and invest. And if I'm challenged by the United States, I will take legal action because their actions or their sanctions are illegitimate. So it took a legitimization of Zimbabwe, an issue of showing the illegality of sanctions to get investors confident again to have the current Emiratis and the Indians who want to build these mega cities. So we'll have more mega cities as the message that Zimbabwe is not an illegitimate state and the fact that the government of Zimbabwe is not a criminal state continues to proliferate, because Zimbabwe had suffered what Saddam Hussein had suffered. They had suffered the lie of weapons of mass destruction. Zimbabwe was being said to be a violator of human rights. It was a lie, just like the issue of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And we as civil societies began to articulate that there's a lie taking place in Zimbabwe. It's propaganda. And now people have begun to understand. We need to continue doing that. And you, Tadiwa, as a Zimbabwean, together with your friends, your circle of influence, make it fashionable to speak positive about Zimbabwe. Make it fashionable to question people who make allegations about Zimbabwe, to prove it in a court of law, and to continue to say to people, until it's proved in a court of law that my country does that, I will not accept that. And you have to defend your country. Only then will investors want to invest in a country that has got a good image defended by you. Thank you.
All right. Wow. Thank you so much for that. We're going to be wrapping up in the next 5 minutes. Actually, we have overstayed. Anyway, I wanted you, Rutendo, to answer 2 questions for me as quick as you can. Then you can also wrap up so that others can also wrap up and we all go. You mentioned the issue of taking opposition leaders to court. Yeah, with the elections coming up, a lot of people have questions that is it not another ZANU-PF plan to make sure that you take out opposition from standing for elections next year? When you spoke about cartels in Zimbabwe who trying to stop the campaign. From my understanding, if I heard you correctly, these cartels are not really opposition, but individuals who are actually, maybe ZANU-PF or something. I don't know if you would like to elaborate on that. What kind of cartels are we looking at? And also the third one is that I saw people have been posting these cars that were bought by ZANU-PF after the Congress for campaigns and stuff. So they are making fun of the sanction campaigning, saying, okay, with all the sanctions, but they are able to buy vehicles. Would you like to elaborate on that? Let's say in the next 3 minutes.
Right. So first of all, the issue of the opposition is that sanctions have been declared illegal. Implementers of sanctions are said to be undertaking an illegality. Therefore, those that called for the implementation of illegal sanctions so that they could punish Zimbabweans, they could persecute Zimbabweans, deny them water, healthcare, education, also committed a crime against humanity. So when we as a civil society have decided to take legal action against them, it's not a political decision. It is a legal decision. People who've harmed the people of Zimbabwe, people who've committed a crime against humanity must be prosecuted. And the reason we are doing it as a civil society organization is that the government is not really for it. The government doesn't want to prosecute those people because it doesn't want to be seen to be persecuting the civilians. And we keep saying to government, you can't let the opposition get away with committing crimes against humanity, with persecuting the Zimbabwean people, with terrorizing the Zimbabwean people to force them to vote for them into power. But the government is saying if we do that, people won't understand that we're actually trying to enforce the law. They will just assume that we're persecuting the opposition. So we as a civil society organization have decided to go against these opposition members and anyone else who is supporting sanctions by implementing them through the courts. Let the courts make a decision and let politicians not make the decision on our behalf. Then let's go on to the point of the cartels. There are a number of cartels in Zimbabwe. Some of them are obvious, some of them are not obvious. I'll give you a perfect example. INSCO is a cartel. Billy Rottenberg is a cartel, and many others. Those people have shown that they are not interested in sanctions going because they have a monopoly on the economy. They have a monopoly on collecting money or collecting foreign currency from the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. They have monopolies that are making them make supernormal profits. They don't want sanctions to go. And these are among the people that are becoming a problem to us. But they are not the only ones. Within the ZANU-PF political party are cartels as well that are actively sabotaging what we're doing. And the reason I'm talking about it is because we become victims of their sabotage. But we will not go and talk about names because we do need partnerships with business. And some of these people could be partners in the future. So that is why we will not really go out of our way to expose them and expose their names. But they are there. And they've become threatening to the extent that we're hearing of death lists and hit squads. And this is beginning to worry us. Then we come from there, go to the issue of ZANU-PF buying cars. ZANU-PF is a political party. It's a private organization. It is not a public organization. And for that reason, it can do with monies that are raised from its citizens, from its members, the way that it wants. I have been to a few ZANU-PF meetings where we were asked to present on issues of sanctions, and we heard ZANU-PF selling cards, membership cards. We heard ZANU-PF asking for pledges, asking for donations, asking for monies for projects that happen within ZANU-PF. We've also heard the businessmen. I went into another event, a business event, where business people from ZANU-PF were giving huge amounts of money for issues and projects that were happening in ZANU-PF. So I know that ZANU-PF raises its own money for its own activities. And the business people in there, the millionaires and billionaires in there, give their money to drive a certain agenda. Some of them give money to make sure that ZANU-PF can stay in power. It cannot be then that those people have given their money, the members have given their money for the buying of cars for electioneering, and someone expects that money to be taken to buy ambulances for the government when that's not the responsibility of those members of ZANU-PF. And so some people will do what it takes for ZANU-PF to stay in power and to electioneer and to win elections. They don't want their money to be misappropriated and to be put to buying ambulances. The ambulances must be bought by the government and local governments. The majority of ambulances that you see in any country are controlled by the city council. They're controlled by those fire stations that we see in Zimbabwe. Those are not controlled by the government of Zimbabwe, but they're controlled by the opposition. But the opposition went and bought a bulletproof car. They went and bought offices at Harvest House. They've bought cars themselves, but they've never used that to buy ambulances. So why should ZANU-PF be expected to buy ambulances when the opposition doesn't use its money to buy ambulances? What we need is a government that has got enough taxes to be able to utilize those taxes to buy what it needs at municipal level and to buy what it needs at devolution and national level. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I think that answers to a lot of people. More questions, but we don't have much time left to deliberate on this. I do believe that we'll keep the conversation going regarding this issue of Zimbabwe and sanctions. We are about to wrap up. Mr. Mandaza, anything that you want to say to the people as your closing remarks?
Well, I would have loved to answer a few questions which had to do with the ZANU-PF's name, but some of them were answered by Rotendo, and I'm glad that on the issue of the cars that people continue to ask about, he nailed it on the head, because ZANU-PF is a private organization. It has its sources of money, and among them, we are selling cards almost every day. We are in the diaspora and also in Zimbabwe. So we have been in the process of accumulating money that is meant to run the organization. And we are supposed to, as an organization, to make sure that we have the resources to capacitate those that are going to go into the election, as much as the members of those that are in the opposition have also the responsibility to use their resources to buy cars and other things to capacitate those that will be going in the campaign. But over and above that, I think it is our responsibility as Zimbabweans to make sure that we work together in unity to develop our country. This thing of saying this belongs to ZANU-PF, then we need not be part of it. I think it does not serve the interests of the majority of the people in the country. Therefore, it is our call, and which has been the call of the president of the party, who was resoundingly re-elected to lead the party for the next 5 years, that let us unite as Zimbabweans and be masters of our own destiny. And we can only do so and do it effectively if we are united. And if we have people that are in the opposition, their role should be to make sure that they ask the government to account for everything that they are supposed to do. And that will be the responsibility of those that are sent to the party, to the government by our party. And as you know, we have supremacy of the party over government. So it means that we, those that are at the in the Politburo, they are in the business of making sure that policies that are enunciated by the party, they are implemented by government. And we can work, we can have our Politburo members asking those that are in government to account, and also those in the opposition doing the very same thing. But it must be from a political organization that has interests to the development of the country, unlike some of the political actors that we have seen. And now they've been laid bare by Tongai Matutu, who have come up with a list of people that have called for sanctions. And Rutendo and his organization are doing the right thing to make sure that they take this to court so that they can account for their deeds. Because it is not fair that a group of people and some organizations sit down and plan to have the kind of suffering that we have seen in Zimbabwe. But as my last words, I think all of us, let us go and exercise our democratic right and register to vote and vote peacefully come 2023.
Thank you so much. That was Mr. Mandasa from ZANU-PF. Thank you so much. Kwame, any closing remarks?
Thank you, Mother. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes, thank you very much once again for hosting this program. Thank you to my brother, Rutendo, and thank you to the representative from ZANU-PF also. Yeah, I would just like to re-emphasize the point which I made, the issue, I think, of constant re-engagement on our continent. I think is very important. And as a people, as young people on the continent, we have to pay very close attention, not only to what is happening in Zimbabwe, if you are Zimbabwean, or if you are from the SADC region, but also you have to pay attention to what is going on across the whole continent, because what we are fighting is not not merely the issue of sanctions, but these sanctions are a symptom of a larger problem, and that larger problem is colonialism. Is the greedy people who want to take Africa's resources. So it would be self-defeating for us to defeat for people or a group of people to defeat colonialism in one side of the continent and leave it marauding and moving on to on the rest of the part of the continent, without being touched, like what we are seeing, what is happening in Ethiopia. This is, colonialism. This is naked colonialism in itself. The sanctions in Zimbabwe, that is naked colonialism. And what we are seeing in Mali, that is naked colonialism. Guinea, Burkina Faso, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where people have complained about the UN, all over in Somalia. So the United States is all over here. It's not only disturbing Zimbabwe. Is disturbing the whole continent, and all the Europeans are disturbing the whole continent. When we hear about the East African oil pipeline, where European Union is trying to sanction so that the European, the East African oil pipeline, which is around 1,400 kilometers from the western part of Uganda to the port in Tanga in Tanzania, to transport the crude oil. So all this is neocolonialism around the continent. So it is imperative that we as young people understand that this continent belongs to us, and we need to fight for it. If we don't fight for it, then the people who want to colonize us and continue to oppress us and deny us of our dignity and humanity and human rights and resources, they'll continue to scheme and steal from us. So it is important that we pay attention to the events that are happening all over the continent and speak about them and talk about them and inform ourselves about them, so that these colonialists and oppressors cannot continue to come and use this an opportunity to manipulate, because they are using the opportunity that people do not understand what is going on the other part of the continent, and they manipulate. And if you look at Africa on the map, why we have had these problems repeatedly is because we are a single land mass. That is why it is impossible to develop one part of the continent without developing all the other parts of the continent. If you look at it, many people have compared Africa to Singapore, different parts of the continent to Singapore, Kenya, Uganda, Ghana. They were saying that, Singapore started developing at the same stages when, Africa independence and stuff like that. But Singapore is a small island, and Africa is a huge, landmass. So you cannot develop the African continent, only one part of it, a small part of it, and say you will not develop the rest of the continent. So this is what Dr. Kwame Nkrumah was driving, and people like Robert Sobukwe of South Africa understood that we have to develop the whole continent. So this generation of people, and young people especially, what I would like to call them to is to pay attention to the whole continent and how the enemy is manipulating the different parts of the continent. And whenever one part of the continent is manipulated, we should call out this manipulation and call these oppressors to leave the continent, or even be able and be ready to fight, for this continent. And the governments, those are progressive African governments on the continent, I would call them to, to work together with those progressive people and groups on the continent, the African civil society, like the one Rutendo belongs to, and within themselves also as governments, as progressive governments. I think they need to continue to work together and re-engage continuously. Like we saw the Prime Minister Abiy of Ethiopia mentioned that if it was not for the regional cooperation, Ethiopia would have been destroyed by these exploiters and colonialists who have wanted to exploit it. So it is very important for us to keep communicating and talking to each other, and then sharing these experiences. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That's Kwame Gonse from Connect Africa. Tadiwa, any closing remarks?
All right, thank you.
I think
Thank
we
you very
lost
much
him.
for
Thank you
the
so
show.
much to those who tuned in. Today was a great day. I actually learned a lot. And we're going to schedule another one because when it comes to these issues of Zimbabwe and sanctions, there is just a lot to be said and to be done. And to everybody out there, civil society, individuals, businesses, from any political party, educate yourself on the issues that are affecting Zimbabwe and at continental level. It's easy to just see things on social media, see comments on social media, then you run with it and you think that is every opinion is the truth. Go and research on your own, read on your own, follow people who you believe that they are standing for Africa and what Africa is all about. It doesn't matter whatever political party that you are from. What matters is, are you protecting the brand called Africa? I remember when there was compensation, they said white people whose land was taken from in Zim were to be compensated. And part of the compensation, there were rumors that they will get back their land. Funny enough, a lot of people from opposition or who are not really friendly with ZANU-PF went like, no, not my land. When it comes to land, we can have another another discussion. That's when I realized, okay, so you do agree when it comes to this. So overall, we are all agreeing on one thing. It's just how we do it or our solutions that we're coming up with. So thank you so much to the guests. Say thank you so much to the listeners and for taking your time to be here. We're gonna continue with the conversation in future. Thank you. I see a new comment. Let me read it before we move on. Esther Kuntai. She's saying, okay, Queen Esther Kuntai, we need to rise up to a place where even individuals feel obligated to contribute to the development of their own country. Life is not factual on social media, but on the ground. And talking about on the ground, I do agree 100%. I've been writing about what's happening on the ground. And I want to say this to people in diaspora. Don't be clouded by what you see on social media. Go on the ground, move around, and see what's going on. As much as we are talking about all of this, there are some people who are on the ground who are actually making it work and making it happen. So imagine a Zimbabwe where there are no sanctions, a Zimbabwe that is an economy that is working, and you don't have a registered company in Zimbabwe. You are in your late 30s and you are in your 40s and you are waiting that when that happens, I should get a job. Yes, you are qualified, you are skilled, you might. But the number of graduates on the ground in Zimbabwe who are getting the masters and doctorates, they are just a lot. So see yourself somewhere, try and register a company, start something, sell freezes if you have to, so that you can understand what's going on. Takanyeperwa, we were lied to as people in diaspora that we have all the money in the world and we have everything. Of course, to a great extent, maybe. But thing is, get yourself on the ground. And to everybody listening, have a great evening. And I'm signing out.